So, we'll breeze over Hamed's intro because you know a bit about him now, but like I said, it's an honor having him back because, 3 years ago now, at the inauguration of this conference, he was the person I identified. If I'm going to interview one Vancouver-based entrepreneur, I want Hamed Shahbazi, and we had him up on stage and talked about the process of building TIO and exiting that to PayPal and what he was going to do next. At that time, he didn't mention Well Health, but I'm excited to hear about it. And to Hamed's left, we have Marc Kohler. Marc was the executive chairman of QHR, another massive Canadian success story in the health tech space. Marc is a very active board member and advisor and mentor to emerging companies. And to Marc's left, we have Bruce Schmidt, runs a consulting practice focused on the life science sector, also an advisor and mentor to emerging companies, co-founder of Genome DX with the objective of enabling personalized medical approaches to chronic disease. How did I do, Bruce? All right.
Oh, thanks. So I'm here to talk pretty generally about digital health. And the fact is that we now have, certainly in Canada and other places in the United States, the best we've done so far is taking data off of cards and put it onto a computer with no real ability to really organize that data unless we just need something on that specific patient, which is good, but really not what medicine is at all. So this business is very fragmented. We have patients that have a hard time talking to their doctors. If it's chronic care, they have to wait a long time to get into a chronic care facility, like for cancer or for any other chronic disease. The fact is that we need to use care plans. I mean, we've had care plans forever, and they do work, but they don't work in an analog setting. So care plans are the complete set of instructions that patient needs to interact with their disease. And what we have to do is, if we consider that the average person with a chronic disease has 7 things going on with them. It could be blood pressure, it could be diabetes, it could be all kinds of other things, and the disease that they have. So how do you really work with that? How can you understand what's going with that? And not even that, but how do you understand what that person should do? They know they've got a disease, they just don't know what to do next. So there is a movement to organize this data for the benefit of that patient, but also for the benefit of the payers, which need less fragmentation. They need to be more certain of what the disease is. The last thing they need is a bunch of hospital visits or ER visits that will increase the cost of that patient. If they were really just in a situation where they could understand what the patient's problem is, that wouldn't happen. So the fact is about 90% of healthcare goes on in the home, and so the way that you can really maximize that is by making communications really flexible and very certain for the patient. And that is now starting to happen.
And it's kind of been lacking in the past. I would say, our system is quite slow. It's very difficult to get appointments, to get results takes time, and probably discourages a lot of people from taking action when maybe they should. And you see that changing.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And is that the focus of this panel is the digitization of our health industry. And so let's just, for my benefit and for the benefit of my audience, maybe define that a little bit. So Hamed, when I say we're talking about digital health, what comes to mind?
It's a really good question. I think it's the whole experience of how you interact with your practitioners, you interact with your data, and I think one of the biggest issues that we have right now is patients are not really empowered with their own information. And so I think a lot of the steam behind digital health right now is about putting people back in control of their own healthcare. Because the best situation, is to stop people from getting sick as opposed to caring for them when they're sick. That's sick care, not health care. So I think real health care is about preemptive efforts to make it such that people are able to avoid that healthcare issue. I think a good point was made by Bruce about 90% of healthcare happens at home. It's true. All those bad behaviors are mostly what cause us to get to a healthcare crisis. And so, if we can get practitioners and our home team all together, which is I think this concept of a care team that Bruce was talking about, that could be really helpful. But I think it's a big part of this is you hear about the consumerization of healthcare, which is really empowering people as consumers and putting the control back to them. And this means, can you imagine? Here in Canada, probably less than 5% of us can log into a portal, and see everything about ourselves.
My biggest pet peeve, absolutely. And e-health is not the solution.
Exactly. And through that portal, be able to communicate with our practitioner, to be able to form, new appointments, whether virtual or physical. So to me, it's a lot about that, not EMR, but PMR, personal medical records.
Okay.
And digital patient engagement.
Now, is this what Marc, please, yeah.
Yeah, I just got a comment here. Great to be here, and great to sit between two very learned souls in healthcare, and very strong statements already being made from the perspective of the patient, and that's us as people, right? For us, at Exelerate, we have a perspective, and it goes to the system side. So it starts with understanding what is healthcare. And then as you define healthcare, some would define it as it's the hospital that you visit on an emergency episode on on Saturday night, and you want to get back home as fast as you can. For others, it's a visit to their doctor, GP, maybe a specialist if they have something else that's going on. To others, it could be like my father. He's 93, he lives at home, and he's going to live at home till forever. He's healthy as a horse. And his definition of healthcare is going to be, does anybody come and visit him and help him that one or two times in a month where he might just need a little extra look-see. So you have these pieces of healthcare, that's the system side, and then you have technologies that are applied against all those pieces. And I think the folks you see today up front, we've seen success, and we've helped the system along, primarily at the point where it goes from a hospital and a person is transitioning back to home. So it could be primary care systems, EMRs, that sort of thing. If you're familiar, and Jay said it, I was the executive chairman of QHR, which was Canada's largest single EMR, and it was a public company, and we ended up selling it into a pharmacy chain, Shoppers, and Loblaw companies about a year and a half ago. The value of that transaction, if I can carry on, is the data. It was the information that was flowing through that technology. And so from our perspective, we're all about the data. We're all about looking at value in the data. And in fact, we just started we launched a CPC, it went public in June. It's called Exelerate Capital Corp. Not very imaginative from my perspective, because I have other companies that are very similar, but we launched it, and guess what we're doing? We're going to look for companies in healthcare technology, and we're going to support companies to become scaling companies like QHR was. We want to emulate Hamid and his great success, complement Hamid and his great successes by building an information supply chain.
And I think Exelerate is quite unique in its sole focus in the healthcare sector. And what I love about it is that you're making a sort of uncrowded bet into a very, very large market, right? And that's exciting. So, what drove that? Because there aren't a lot of CPCs that just focus on the healthcare sector. What's driving you right now, Marc?
It's driving us is looking for QTs, qualifying transactions.
Okay.
And so our behavior has always been, in my career in the last 15 years, is keeping our eyes on technology businesses that number 20. So we have a list of 20 companies we follow right now. They're all over North America. And they qualify, and they range from $30 million in revenue top line to maybe $250,000 in top line revenue. And we're looking at each one of them right now.
And within that vertical, what's standing out to you right now as leaders that are most exciting?
What stands out is, again, that movement of data between primarily the physician or the provider at healthcare and the patient. So it does get back to what the gentlemen here have talked to.
Right.
We see that. It's also the systems that help the physician make decisions at point of care. So if they're looking at an x-ray, they need to maybe enroll or tap into a technology or software that will help them decide what other tests are necessary, what other drugs could necessarily be applied.
Right. And then, it's no coincidence that we've got a massive feature on health technology at this event. And Bruce, from your seat, are you seeing a bit of a tide change, capital flowing this direction and a pickup in interest? I certainly am at the conferences, but what about you?
I think that everybody wants healthcare to become a good investment. And I think that that's quite possible if we start really delivering on what the rest of the tech universe wants. I mean, it's hard sometimes to say that healthcare is tech, but it really is a form of tech, and we have to start making it more efficient for the payers, especially. Because the reason we're not getting a lot of the care that we want is because it's marginalized because of cost constraints, and that's where we can all make a difference, by trying to do things that will make the healthcare system more efficient. But the patient is really the central issue, and how can we make sure that people feel like they have control over their health, and also control over any if it happens, control over that disease.
Right, and that's a trend we're seeing across all industries. Control is coming back to the consumer, back to the individual, and that hasn't really happened yet in the healthcare industry, has it? And maybe that's what's driving you, because like I said during your intro, after selling TIO, you could have chosen to do anything. Of course, you jump back into a new venture, and this one is Well Health. So other than what I know about you personally, I know you're very health conscious, and we've talked about this a little bit, but what drove you to jump into Well Health as your next full-time ambition?
That's a great question. I mean, there were a couple things for me. One is I was inspired by Dental Corp. Dental Corp is a Canadian venture that was recently acquired by a private equity firm that got to about 370 clinics here, and I believe they're roughly at around $1 billion in revenue and very strong operating margins, EBITDA operating margins. And it started to get me thinking about, well, why hasn't that happened in medical? And I'd ask a bunch of people, and I got no good answers. And so, as an entrepreneur, that thread, just continued and continued and continued, and to the point where, wow, this is an incredible opportunity, right? And I think that was a big part of it. The other part of it is I really look for industries where there could be a big market and there could be a big impact element. I think we live in a world today where your efforts have to be purpose driven. They have to be focused on doing well and doing good. And if you don't do those things, that used to be like a nice to have, but now I think it's a must have if you want to attract the best people. And so I think there's just so many people that I think are a bit outraged about how people still wait 1 or 2 hours in a waiting room for 3 minutes of doctor's time.
Yeah.
And so that's got to change, right? Somehow that's got to change. And the thing is, the technology exists out there. So I would love for our efforts to result in lower wait times, better experience, because I think that results in better outcomes. What we see, which is really dangerous, is people say, gosh, I really should go to the doctor to get this thing checked out, but I got to wait 2 hours. It's going to take half my day. I'm not going to do it this week. I'll do it next week. And then I get to next week, and they're even busier. I'm going to do it next week. And so many diseases are incredibly focused on time. Like the essence of time is so real. Like cancer, especially. the progression, if you get cancer early enough, almost all forms of cancer, early enough, there's almost something you can do about it. The problem is it's very, very hard to detect. Now you have a simple blood test where you can determine whether or not you have early cancer markers and metabolites in your blood. People ask me, should I be doing that? That sounds really, really kind of like heavy. I say, absolutely. This is Alzheimer's? No, don't, because there's nothing you can do about it. Right. But cancer, absolutely, there's something you can do. So all this to say that I think being in a business where you could possibly make a positive impact, I think is really helpful.
You nailed it on the head. Like it's so complicated and exhausting to get help, I think, that we don't do it until we're in pain. And I'm super proactive, like I think I am anyways, in terms of learning about my health, and I'm fairly progressive. But classic example is I've been debating getting a bunch of gut health tests recently, procrastinated for like 2-3 months. I even had the requisitions on my desk. But it wasn't until 2 weeks ago I found myself doubled over in gut pain, and I couldn't identify what it was. I ended up in the ER actually on Thursday night. Didn't get any conclusive answers, and I live in Squamish. It's a quiet hospital. It's actually awesome. Within an hour and a half, I had blood work, urine work, x-ray, etc. But then I saw my naturopath, found out I probably have this condition called SIBO. But because of that, now I'm expediting everything. I'm getting all the tests, right? Because I'm in pain, and I react to that. But it's too complicated and exhausting before the pain to engage. And it was, okay, so a couple more things that you said, Hamed. I mean, we're digitizing the healthcare sector. You're rolling up clinics. And you could say those two things are unbalanced. Like, why would you be buying clinics if we're moving to a telehealth model?
Right. No, great question. So we are buying also software companies, but you're right, we're buying clinics. One of the reasons why we're buying clinics is we don't see that as an offline business. We don't see that as a traditional business. We think everything becomes a digital business in healthcare in the future. So we think the clinic of tomorrow is a clinic where every single doctor in that clinic starts introducing telemedicine in their practice. And that's really the best care. The best care is your family doctor providing that care continuum. Your family doctor knows a lot about you, and that's the best case, as opposed to you going somewhere and talking to a practitioner that knows nothing about you and gets to spend those precious few minutes with you. And so what we really want is a more convenient way of interacting with the people that know the most about us. And so our efforts to digitize and advance the clinics of today, because really what makes those clinics valuable is the doctors. Doctors provide care, not facilities, right? And so we're really excited about consolidating that asset class and then empowering the physicians inside those clinics to extend care in a more digital and more convenient fashion.
Right. And then, Marc, you're looking at the sector so closely. Why don't you walk us down the path a little bit? What does a visit with my physician look like 10 years down the road?
Well, I'm hopeful that the visit at your physician will be very similar to the visit at my physician. And what I'm getting at is that we kind of break through a lot of the noise that's out there right now. There's a lot of really cool ideas that are coming from all over the world right now, and little companies are being developed, and great little features and technology are being deployed, but only in maybe your corner of the world in BC, and then there's my little corner of the world in Toronto. Never shall the two kind of meet, and never can we get to the point where we decide which one's the winner, which one's really scalable. So, before I move on as well, I'm really happy to be sitting beside Hamed, because hats off to him for being a business leader and making sure that the businesses that he builds are scaled and are focused on cash flows and value for shareholders, and ultimately, value to the customers and his clinics and that sort of thing. That's what I think is going to happen within the next 10 years. We're going to see probably fewer flavors, better scaled technology, and better kind of forceful and maybe difficult decisions being made by the system, the healthcare system again, to back technologies that we can trust. And one of the biggest things in healthcare for us is that you can trust healthcare, and it's two things. One is you can trust that where you need the information, when you need the information, it's going to be there for your doctor and for yourself. That's the when and the where. And then the second piece is that it's going to be protected. The data and the information, your information, and the decision making for the doctor, that information is going to be protected. So there's the privacy rules in the world right now. They're very advanced, very helpful to business. They have to be better interpreted and better understood. And I think that's going to happen very shortly. And the security of that data. And it's a bit of a bridge to the rest of your theme this afternoon with the data privacy and that sort of thing. But in healthcare, it's paramount, and we will get there within 10 years.
Is good, and also is that in any way a negative in that I want to pool everybody's data, including mine, to get a better understanding of my outcome, right? Like, we can learn more the more data that we have. Data is great if you can leverage it, right? And so don't those Chinese walls hurt us a little bit, or how do we overcome that?
I think that it's only a matter of time before we will have to have data from larger data sets and be able to do interrogations that make sense for a whole population. So it's a matter of I think trying to integrate. We've got great privacy tools today. I think when we're able to, especially in chronic disease, when there's always some sort of central agency that is responsible for that disease, you can collect all the data from all of the individuals and look at it in a way that would allow you to be prescriptive about certain outcomes, certain drugs that may or may not work, what future drugs look like based on the genotyping that you're getting out of that patient group. So the fact is that we all have similarities, and when we have diseases, we all have a certain number of potential disease types. And if we can get enough data on that, we can also say, what did the outcomes of some people who had those types of diseases before look like? And so by comparing the genotype of a patient or the patient's tumor, for example, with the outcomes of a group of people that were similar, we can now say, you should take that drug, you don't need surgery, you really need watchful waiting or something like that. It makes the whole system so much more efficient.
Right, and we're traveling that direction?
We are very much, and I also think that we're in the business now of virtual clinical trials. Instead of actually having a bunch of animals to start off with, and then a bunch of usually very sick patients, which aren't great clinical trial subjects really, but they appreciate the chance for another chance. But we now can certainly do this, and there's no.
And when you say virtual trials, Bruce, you mean our ability to test a drug without going through?
Yeah, I mean you can do virtual by looking at all this data that you have. We can actually say what would that firstly. There's a morphology for all tumors. They have cells that look different from others. So once you know what a tumor looks like, you can then know what kind of drug would impinge on that in the proper way. And then you could say, okay, that individual has this type of disease progression, so let's put all that data together. Look at you could easily get 50,000 people. Even in the U.S., for example, with the same disease, the same subtype, the same everything, and you could get a really good picture of how that patient should be handled in the system, and it's being done. It's being done today.
And how are we doing within Canada in terms of comparing us to a global standard of progressive thinkers in the healthcare industry? Are we setting the bar, or are we playing catch up? Well, how do we stack up?
So the first thing that we suffer from is scale. So the fact is that when we're 30 million people and the world is 8 billion, you have to kind of look at that. And we also now have ethnicities that are coming into our populations, and they could be second or third generation of a particular ethnicity, but still have some pretty distinct disease types that came along with their heritage. So it's complicated here. You know, it's more complicated because you tend to have places like Vancouver with high levels of ethnic populations, all needing not only have different attitudes towards being treated, but needing different types of treatments, and also the drugs that aren't necessarily there for them, or maybe there are lots of things available for them, but not for the general public.
Right.
So,
Marc, Ahmed, anything to add to that?
Not that much, other than I think we're a little behind, and I think we're getting better. A lot of our governments, our provinces control healthcare spend, and they're independent of each other. So there's not a lot of banding together and a lot of strategy being placed in the right spots. Let's put it that way. From my experience, I mean, it's a positive experience. We're getting better, but it does entail traveling. You know, physically traveling to the U.S., physically traveling to Europe, looking at other developed technologies, software systems, the way physicians behave in California versus in Ontario, to learn. And that's what we've done over the years, probably the last 15 years. And
have you found a gold standard somewhere that we're looking forward to? Is there a location?
Well, it all depends on the part of healthcare you're talking about.
Sure.
It's so awful
of course.
Broad. But I mean, Ontario, I'm from Ontario, proudly from Ontario. It did make some missteps over the years, about 8-9 years ago, but it did recover, and it built a provincial case management system for home care. And all the transactions and all the assessments for people that are at home and seniors at home, they're all operated or managed through this one technology. And to this day, even though it was developed 10 years ago, they still hold it up as a gold standard. It's called CHRIS, Client Health Related Information System, like whoop-de-doo. But it's pretty cool. Similar with EMR, the EMR strategy in Ontario was laden with a lot of cash, and so that helped a little bit. And we've been able to move a lot of that knowledge across other provinces because of the money that flowed through there. That money's slowing down, and now we need people like Ahmed to make good use of other technologies in a real business again, to move it forward. So.
Yeah, and as the entrepreneur, where are you looking for guidance? Or do you feel like a trailblazer, or are you following in the footsteps of others? Where are you getting your concepts from?
I think we're definitely following in the footsteps of others, from the standpoint that all this guidance and all this thought leadership exists, and that's probably what's most disenfranchising about Canada, is like we have all the smarts here. It's all here, and I think Marc hit it on the head when he said that there was this lack of clarity around data management and data sharing and data use, and that really gets in the way because listen, the only way forward is for data to come together. That's the only way forward. That's what's going to happen. It either is going to take us 10 years, 5 years, or 30 years, but it's going to happen at some point in time. So I think to me, that transformation needs to occur with help from the regulators and governments, and I think this siloed effect of the provinces doesn't help. But I think it really we start cooking with oil here, with fire, when people get empowered. Because what happens is then when people get empowered with a PMR, with a personal medical record system, when they are interfacing with their own data every day, it becomes easy for them to consent clearly. I consent, use my data. I really want to see the world progress. That's when we start really moving forward. It's the will of the people. We need to give them in a way to exercise their will. The future's coming. We're here at this conference, the extraordinary futures. It's coming. We want to be part of that. So that's why it's so important that we band together and we give them, and people really the will and the tools to exercise their will. Yeah.
Just one really quick one. It's ironic that all three of us know this individual, Alexandra Greenhill, who has started a company called Care Team to do exactly this integration.
Can you give us the quick summary on Care Team, because it's a very cool company?
Yeah, it's a local startup. It's really a company that wants to manage the entire spectrum of the health experience. So there has to be, the patient is the center. The patient, it's their data. They should be responsible for that data, and they should share it with what they want, who they want. There's the payer, the hospital or the clinic, and this can be U.S. or here. And then there's the actual data that comes out of it, as well as family and the coordination of care. And so this is a portal, essentially. It's a SaaS product that is going to allow all the caregivers and actors in the patient's life to be able to know what's going on with that patient and what's coming next. And it really emancipates the entire process, because there's always a sense of control over what's going on with that patient with it.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you a quick question for the panel. You can just tell me if I'm completely out to lunch or not. And my question is, I've made a prediction. I don't make predictions. I hire people to speak who make predictions, and I listen to them. But I've got a hopeful prediction that health technology will be the biggest bull market of my lifetime. And the reason I say that is because I have more access to data than I ever imagined I would at this point. But more importantly, I'm watching the flood of capital enter this space. And you know, in the capital markets, we always say follow the money. The amount of cash moving this way is going to move the needle. We've been able to solve humanity's worst problems, right, in our recent past, whether that's famine, plague, disease, war. You know, we have the luxury of focusing on enhancing and optimizing our life now. You know, we deal with trends in the capital markets. There's always a trend at this conference. This year it's health tech. I want next year to be health tech, and the year after. Do you think I'm out to lunch? Is this the bull market? Is this a bigger movement than just a couple conversations?
I fully agree with you for two reasons. One is there's a real movement to empower patients, this consumerization, which, let's call it preventative health. The idea that let's give patients the chance to be empowered to maintain health. The other is precision medicine. Now that everything has become so small, and we can now start to create very custom therapies. By virtue of our metabolome, our microbiome, all these sort of ohms. In fact, there's a whole idea of the field is called Multi-Omics, right? Our proteome. We now can understand people fairly easily on a molecular level. So this was all kind of started by the genome, right? That's where it became famous anyway. 23andMe. Everyone knows 23andMe. Well, the equivalent of 23andMe and all these other parts of your body now allow us to understand people at a molecular level. The potential is incredible to be able to now create customized therapies for people based on the results of all these multi-omic tests. So that is just mind-numbing in potential. And so before, again, we're at an Extraordinary Futures Conference, so how does this change? Before, when you went for an assessment for like a physical, they take your blood test, they'd measure a few vitals, they'd, if you go to Koopman, they'll even do like an ear test, a few other, kind of interesting tests. I mean, what they really should be doing is genetic profile, a profiling of your microbiome, your metabolome, looking for cancer biomarkers, and they'll get there. Koopmans are actually just starting to sell a pharmacogenetic profiling, So anyway, to me, precision medicine, preventative medicine, these are the types of things that will absolutely revolutionize. And all of them are based on more data and the availability of data and really driven by technology.
I love it. And we're out of time, but I want to thank you all not just for being on the panel, but for being in the professions that you are, because I want to live a long time. And people laugh because the promotion for this conference was a video of me saying I plan on running a marathon on my 150th birthday. And I'm not totally kidding. It's something I am looking forward to. But there's so much that we've recently had access to. My biggest challenge personally is the fragmentation of all this data. It's great that we can gather it all now. Making sense of it's the hard part. It's what you're working on that makes me very happy because it gives me something to look forward to. Thank you so much for sitting on the panel. And are you guys going to be on the floor if anybody has questions for you? Yeah, right outside the speaker hall. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Please give our panel a hand.
Thanks.